Greetings and welcome. This is the second video of CBV Institute's three-part succession planning video series. Today, we will focus on how Chartered Business Valuators, or CBVs, can work with CPAs on a succession planning team. Joining me today is Jason Kwiatkowski. Jason is a CPA and a CBV. Jason is the founding partner and president at Valuation Support Partners Limited, a professional services firm specializing in providing the business and legal communities with business valuation, litigation support, and exit planning advisory services. Jason, thanks for being with us here today.
Thank you.
So before we kick things off, I think it would be helpful if you could briefly set the stage and share your experience with succession planning engagements.
Okay, sure, I can do that quickly. As you mentioned, I am a CPA myself since 1998 and a CBV since 2000. So I've been working in this area for a number of years. I also obtained my CPA designation in 2009, which is a certified exit planning advisor. So I personally have had an interest and involvement in succession planning for many years. Now, my involvement with succession or exit planning or transition planning, however you want to refer to it, is primarily from the business valuation perspective. I'm generally the business valuation expert on the succession planning team. So I am there to help business owners understand and manage their value expectations, or even how to enhance or increase the value of their business. And I'm there to provide business valuation reports when they're needed to support some form of a transition or exit, whether that's from a tax planning perspective or a sale of the business, or even buying out a partner or other shareholder.
Great, thank you. We're looking forward to hearing more and gleaning from your expertise today. I'm really excited to be talking to you today with respect to succession planning because it is such a hot topic in Canada right now. As you're well aware, there was a recent study from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, or CFIB, that indicated that over 70% of business owners plan to exit their businesses in the coming decade, meaning that there is the potential for over $2 trillion worth of business assets to change hands during that period. So that statistic, to me, in and of itself, is mind-blowing. But the study goes on to report that only 1 in 10 business owners have a formal succession plan in place, and that 84% of owners noted it was very or somewhat difficult to value their businesses. So these statistics, I think, lead me into my first question for you. Why should succession planning be an important topic for CPAs specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Why is the big question you always start with, right? So in light of the studies that you mentioned, and they are mind-blowing and a little bit scary. And these studies have been around for a while. And when you talk about, 10 years ahead, 70% of business owners think, oh, that's down the road and that's not me. But, you look at those studies and they even say up to 50% in the next 5 years, and 5 years goes by very quickly. So in light of those studies, I think succession planning is very important for CPAs for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think CPAs are seen as a most trusted advisor to many of their business owner clients. Business owners turn to their CPA for advice on anything financial, including succession planning. So I think, given that, I think CPAs have somewhat of a duty to educate their clients on the benefits of succession planning, the succession planning process in general. Business owners just need guidance. It's clear from those studies, they need guidance in this area. So that's firstly. Secondly, I think this creates an opportunity for CPAs to add another revenue stream to their practice. I mean, this is, exit planning advisory, succession planning advisory is a value-added service, right, that they can provide to their existing client base, just simply advising throughout the succession planning process and working with their business owners. So, there's a couple of important reasons why this should be high on CPA's list of topics to really understand.
Thanks, Jason. So it's clear from what you just said that succession planning should be top of mind for CPAs. And so what I'm going to do in a few minutes is circle back and ask how CPVs can work with CPAs on succession planning engagements. But before I do, I was hoping that you could speak a bit about the benefits of a properly formulated succession plan, or I guess on the flip side, the risks of not having one.
Yes, absolutely. There are many benefits to having a formal written succession plan. I'll mention four. I'll leave the audience with four very important ones. I mean, number one, business owners like to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
And so having a plan helps to maintain control over how and when they exit their business. Secondly, if you have a formal, written, documented plan, you're going to be more likely to achieve your goals or objectives.
Right.
I mean, that's just been shown over the years. Studies show that you're much more likely to achieve your goals if you write them down. Thirdly, planning as a business owner will help to maximize value and minimize or defer taxes on their eventual transition or exit or sale. I mean, I find one of the main goals business owners have is to maximize their net proceeds when they do sort of retire or sell or transition. So you're only going to get there if you plan. And then fourthly is one that business owners tend not to think about, but many get into, is having a plan will help them avoid conflict.
Right.
Or it'll help them prepare for, people talk about the 5 Ds, right? The dispute, the death, divorce, disability, disaster. It's almost like in insurance. It's there. If you have a plan, it's there if you unexpectedly need it. So it's really about being sale ready. Those are four of the primary benefits of succession planning.
Thanks, Jason. So it is very clear that there are significant advantages to having a properly formulated succession plan, and you just laid those four, big, higher level reasons out very clearly for us. That being said, could you walk us through the steps involved in creating a succession plan?
Sure. I mean, there are workshops and courses and sessions that can last days on this topic, but we'll just give a brief overview. The first thing to remember, I think, is that succession planning is a process, right? It's not a one-time event. It's a process. And you can think of the process in terms of 6 stages or steps. I'll just walk through them briefly. So step 1 is really, it's about your goals, setting your goals or objectives. As the business owner, what are your personal goals? What are your goals for your family? And what are your goals for your business? So you got it. That's where you start. That's where all plans start, with just setting your goals. Step 2 is what we call the financial needs assessment. So it's about thinking, when you exit or when you transition, how much will you need to accomplish or achieve your goals? What are your financial needs? That's step 2, thinking ahead. What do you need to accomplish your goals? Step 3 is conducting the business valuation. So educate yourself on what you have now. What is the value of your business today? And are there any gaps between what you have today and what you need in the future to accomplish your goals? It's that sort of gaps assessment. The 4th step, once you have that, you can start thinking about what are the exit options. So it's assess your exit options. There are many options. Is it going to be an internal transfer or succession of the business, like an internal sale to family member, the next generation, employee group, management group, another partner or shareholder, an internal transfer or an external transfer, an external sale? You want to just put the business for sale in the market and see what you can get for it. So assess your exit options. Step 5 is really where you start crunching the numbers. It's the net proceeds calculations. So here, under different exit options, what you're going to do is you're going to make assumptions on what you'll be able to sell your business for, and then work out the net proceeds under, is it going to be structured as an asset sale or a share sale? There are different tax consequences. But many business owners don't realize that when you sell your business, what you sell it for is not what you put in your pocket. You got to pay off some liabilities, you got to pay some taxes, you got to pay some commissions, some fees, and then it goes in your pocket. So you want to think about that ahead of time. That's why step 5 is the net proceeds calculation. And step 6 is really an ongoing step, and that is where you develop the action plan. That's where you prioritize action items that are going to help you achieve your goal. And it may be implemented over the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 year plan, but you prioritize action items and assign responsibility to those on your team to be responsible for the tasks and keep following up. So I think, just to wrap it up, that's sort of the overview of the 6 steps in the exit planning or succession planning process. I find it can be daunting for business owners to even start succession planning, which is why many don't. So if they break it down into steps, you can sort of tackle it piece by piece. And for CPAs specifically, as the most trusted advisor, I think CPAs can get involved with their clients at every step. There may be other specialists that'll be required to assist at certain steps, but the CPA can really be involved in all stages of the process.
Thanks, Jason. It's certainly understandable how, talking about this process can take a multi-year or a multi-day workshop, but I appreciate your conciseness in laying out those 6 steps for us today. So what I would like to do now is I think circle back to the professionals involved on a succession planning team. And we've talked about how the CPAs can be involved, and it's clear that CPAs do and should have a significant role on a succession planning team. Could you speak now a bit about how CBVs can bring value to a succession planning team?
Absolutely. I think it's important for CPAs to understand that. So CBVs assist really as the independent, experienced, and credible business valuation specialist or expert on the succession planning team, right? So that is one role CBVs have. Can act as the CBV, the valuation specialist. I think CBVs also, can act as a project lead or a team lead in succession planning, the process, right? Because the CBVs are independent. CBVs are used to dealing with many different business owners and have this sort of multidisciplinary perspective or lens that they're looking through things at. So CBVs can also lead the team. I find personally, and now this is going to be different for everyone, CBV, CPA, but personally, within my network, the CPAs tend to take on that lead role most of the time, but I have had CPAs with little interest or knowledge in the area that I've had to sort of help guide them. So another thing to mention is that CBVs tend to get involved earlier in the process. Like we talked about the stages or the steps, and step 3 was conducting the business valuation. That's like your benchmark valuation. You can set your goals quickly. You can assess how much you need, but then the next step is, what do I have right now? Because you can't really start your plan until you have that. So right. CBVs get involved at that stage. And there are many benefits to having an independent business valuation done as part of the succession planning process. It helps business owners manage their value expectations, right? You don't want, one thing some business owners tend to do is think their business is valued so high because of all the effort and sweat they put in over the years to build this business. But really, a third-party purchaser, a third-party investor would not be willing to pay that. So you need to manage your value expectations. It's also important not to leave money on the table. Like you may undervalue your business, but we may come in and say, no, you've actually got something that's worth something someone will pay for, right? So not leaving money on the table. A valuation report is needed in tax planning. If you're going to pass the business on to the next generation, corporate reorganizations, estate freezes, they all need to happen at fair market value. So valuation reports can help with that. Even for planning for business owners will take life insurance as a means sometimes to funding buyout on death. Well, how much coverage do you get, right? And then, I mentioned before the 5Ds, but one of the goals should be really to avoid conflict or avoid legal disputes over value. And a valuation report can at least educate the business owners, if it's a multi-owner business, educate business owners on valuation, manage their expectations, get them talking about value so that they're more on the same page. And that if there's a breakdown in that relationship, they don't have widely diverging views on what the value is, and then are faced with 3 to 5 years of a legal dispute and legal fees, right? So, I mean, that's sort of an overview of how CBVs help in the process.
Thanks, Jason. I think a couple things stuck out to me as you were speaking. I think that 5th D, that dispute over value, is certainly an important consideration, given that business owners are already at a heightened sense of anxiety or nervousness as they contemplate going through the process, or as they go through the process. It's their essentially life's work that they're looking at. And the second point I was thinking about at a high level, going back to that statistic I shared at the beginning of our conversation, that 70% of business owners will be looking to transition their business in the next 10 years. A large chunk of that is going to be owners of private companies. And CBVs have special expertise in education and training in the valuation of private companies. And there are nuances involved in the valuation of private companies. So at a high level, CBVs are certainly the experts in that realm. So it's clear that both CPAs and CBVs should play key roles on a succession planning team. Can you speak a bit as to how those professionals should work together? You've already mentioned a few different things, but how can a CBV provide or help the CPA in delivering value to their clients?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to note that CBVs are not there to replace or compete with CPAs. They're there to work collaboratively together to assist the business owners through the succession planning process. So that's first and foremost. I mean, CPAs and CBVs are both part of a team of specialists or experts that are called upon when required. So I think this is an important message for CPAs, is to build your network of other specialists and experts and advisors, because lawyers are needed, insurance professionals are needed, investment advisors or financial planners are needed, M&A professionals or business brokers are needed, even family coaches and facilitators are sometimes needed. There's many different professionals that are needed. So CPAs and CBVs are working together on the same team for the business owners. There's a lot they can do for each other. I mean, CBVs help to educate CPAs and their clients on the valuation process, different valuation approaches that may be relevant, key value drivers that will affect the value of the client's business, how to enhance or increase value. Like, it's that education that CBVs can provide to CPAs. We mentioned this before, but CBVs are there to provide CPAs and their business owner clients with independent valuation reports when required for planning purposes. And at the same time, as part of that valuation process, CPAs are generally very involved, because they provide the CBVs with documents, information, important insights about the business that's necessary for a CBV to conduct the valuation. And as I mentioned earlier, CPAs are there to assist their business owner clients at every stage of the succession planning process. When you think about valuation, it's generally not something that business owners need every year, right? It's not generally not a recurring service or thing that's required. However, what I find is that most business owners will require or need or benefit from a valuation at some point in their life. And I think for CPAs to have trusted, experienced, independent CBVs to refer their business owner clients to when needed, I mean, that just shows you're there to help solve your clients' problems.
Thanks, Jason. So let's switch gears a bit and look at succession planning from the owner's perspective. I think this is another loaded question for you, but what tips do you have for someone who is planning on selling their business?
Sure. I can leave business owners with three major tips which will pay dividends. All the success stories have these things in common. Number one is start early. Start your planning early. It's never too early. At the same time, business owners want to know when. So I always suggest 3 to 5 years. 3 to 5 years start. And that's because it takes time to build value and increase value. And it takes time to minimize or implement strategies to minimize or defer taxes, right? So 3 to 5 years. So start early is number one. Number two, when you start early, think about assembling your team of advisors, your specialist team, right? Find the specialists that fit well with you, that share common goals, that are there for your interest. Build your team early because you're going to rely on them at different points. So start early, assemble your team. And the third tip is actually start to prepare a pre-sale diligence binder. I mean, if you're going to look to sell your business, you're going to be entering negotiations with potential purchasers. You're going to want to sell to the highest bidder. Going through that process, any M&A professional or business broker will tell you there's a process of due diligence that happens. The buyer's going to want to look at your records. And if you are disorganized, that's a turnoff. And if they find a lot of question marks in that process, they're going to start to whittle down the amount they're going to offer you. But if you're prepared and if you have a binder that's there with everything that they're asking for, at another time we can go through what should be in the contents of the binder, but assemble that binder, be organized, have good systems in place and good records and up-to-date records. And by the way, you don't have to prepare this binder like 6 months before you're ready to sell. Start 3 to 5 years earlier, and it'll just be a rolling document that you just add to every year as you get more records and more contracts and more budgets, and revise your budgets and show what your actual was compared to budget. Like, build that history. So those are the top 3 tips I would leave for business owners looking to sell one day.
Thanks, Jason. I can see how those are 3 excellent tips for business owners that would lead to a good news story and certainly decrease the stress involved in starting or working through this process. So that being said, I was hoping that you could share either some good news stories with us that you were involved with on a succession planning engagement, or any horror stories that you think might be interesting for our viewers to hear about.
Sure. I can mention a few, and I won't get into a lot of details, but just the message. I mean, unfortunately, I've seen more horror stories than success stories. And when I think of horror stories, there are 2 very common sort of recipes for horror stories, which are quite common, unfortunately. And the first common horror story involves a business owner sole owner. They did not start to plan early enough. They were not able to build a saleable business. The business is very dependent on them. It hasn't grown. And I've seen many of those situations where the business owners worked hard to build this business, but the business is dependent on them. And really, when it's come time for them to sort of cash in and retire and sell what they've built, they're really faced with a situation where no one's interested in buying. And not only is no one interested in buying, even business brokers and M&A professionals are not interested in representing them because they don't believe that this is an attractive business for sale. So that is a very common horror story that I think business owners need to think about, and CPAs need to think about, to have a discussion and conversation with their clients about. Another common horror story I see from a lack of planning perspective involves businesses with, it could be 2 or more shareholders.
Mm-hmm.
They could be related parties, brothers, sisters, siblings. They could be independent parties, but these are situations where they have a poor shareholder agreement or maybe no shareholder agreement. They've never addressed the issue of the value of their business. They've never had discussions or communications with each other about, what they think they could sell the business for or what they think the business is worth. And ultimately, if or when there is a breakdown in that relationship or some type of a dispute where they want to go their separate ways, they end up in a legal dispute over value because one thinks the value is this, the other thinks the value is this, and they can't resolve that. And they end up wasting a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money, and a lot of stress in the process to get this resolution. And it in the worst case scenarios, it ends up in court and they're paying tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal and expert fees. And it's just not worth it. And I get called into those situations so many times that could have been avoided with proper planning. So those are the most common horror stories I've seen. When I think about success stories, there are fewer of those, but I would say the success stories always involve the 3 tips that I mentioned earlier: planning early, assembling the advisor team, and preparing that pre-sale binder. I mean, one person that I know years ago implemented that to a T and ended up selling for 10% more than they wanted to initially. They ended up getting a premium on the ultimate sale. I worked with another client who really got involved earlier and wanted a benchmark valuation, and then came back to us 3 years later for another valuation to see how much they had sort of been able to grow their business with their value enhancement initiatives. And they were able to double the value of their business in 3 years by starting early and putting effort into it. Now, they weren't at the point where they were ready to sell, so they didn't start the pre-sale binder, but this was actually a focused initiative on increasing value, and it was very successful.
Thanks, Jason. Let's dig into more when you say that a company or the company wasn't sellable or saleable. I'm assuming what you mean there is that the business was in the owner's head and they have to get it out of their head and put it down on paper. But if you could just maybe expand on that a bit, because I think that's a really important point for business owners, particularly small business owners, to understand before they start the process of trying to sell their business.
For sure. It's an important issue. It's an overlooked issue. And it's a common issue. And it ultimately comes down to the issue of, are you building commercial goodwill in your practice, in your business? Or do you just have personal goodwill? Personal goodwill is really just goodwill from your efforts, from your skills, from your abilities, from your personal relationships, from the fact that this business is dependent on you being involved. And if you aren't involved, everyone would go elsewhere. All your clients would go elsewhere. I think the most common situations where you have personal goodwill and a business owner has not been able to build a saleable business is really they've just created a job for themselves. Is smaller companies that are usually in the service industry of some sort, and they're personally involved with all of their clients. Their clients rely on them. They don't have a large workforce. They may only have one or two other employees, if any. Everything to do with that business is tied to the owner, and no one's going to come along and pay for that. In order to create commercial goodwill, which is saleable, which is transferable, you really have to build a team. You have to build a business that is not dependent on you. So you have a workforce, you have policies, systems, procedures in place. Like you have everything in place, contracts with customers that other team leads are managing the relationship. You have a salesperson or whatever, but you've got a team and you've got a process and you've got things in place that an investor or someone that's looking to acquire and get into this industry could purchase your business, and you still have a team running it. They can help lead it and guide it, but it still runs, and the clients will stay. So that's what we're referring to. I mean, you probably have some things to add to that as well, but that's really what we're dealing with.
No, thanks for expanding on that. I think it's one of the key reasons why a succession planning process should start that 3 to 5 years ahead of time, because if a business owner does need to implement certain changes within their business or their processes, it will take several years to develop those changes or initiate those changes and show a trend after those changes are initiated. So thank you for expanding on that.
Sure.
So Jason, I think that wraps up our time for today. Thank you again for your time and expertise. It's much appreciated. And to our viewers, if you're interested in learning more about what CBVs do, or if you're interested in hiring a CBV to join or lead your succession planning team, see the information at the bottom of your screen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.